Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, episode 7, brought to you by the KeyNote Women Speakers social media and podcast team. We are very happy to present to you a very relevant topic on mindfulness and emotional well-being, choosing happiness. I am Lissy Puno, and I will be your host for this podcast today. I'm a counseling psychologist based in Singapore in private practice at the International Counseling and Psychology Center. My professional career has taken me to a few countries, beginning from the United States and then to the Philippines, to Thailand, to Malaysia, and now in Singapore for the past 15 years. I work with various individuals, couples, families across the lifespan, hoping to promote emotional wellness and psychological well-being. In the past year of the pandemic, I have created a care and wellness series of webinars on relevant topics to help to cope with the pandemic. I'm also an author of a few books, all to support relational wellness and healthy relationships, again, across the lifespan. When not doing counseling and psychotherapy, I do my favorite workshops entitled Getting the Love You Want and Connected Parents, Thriving Kids. I'm happy to say that I have been a member of KeyNote Women Speaker Asia since 2018, a nonprofit organization that started in 2017 supporting women speakers from a variety of industries. The focus of KeyNote is, of course, supporting women and to ensure that they remain relevant in the center stage, in the podium as keynote speakers. But today, I'm happy to be your host and moderator and very excited to introduce our guest for this podcast. With me today is our guest joining us all the way from Manchester, I believe, very early in the morning, and we appreciate her time spent with us today. Karen Scofield. Welcome. Karen's interest in mindfulness, resilience, and happiness is as much personal as professional. After being suddenly widowed in her early 30s, she relocated to Singapore, where she set up and managed a successful business for a UK-based insights company. 3 years later, she took a few months out to travel solo around Asia, which included, in her opinion, one of the ultimate tests of resilience and mental strength, Vipassana, before relocating back to her home city of Manchester in the United Kingdom. Karen is a speaker, trainer, and insight consultant, and she's part of the senior leadership team at Blue Yonder Research, where she leads the qualitative business, specializing in innovative approaches to understand and influence decision-making and behavior. So once again, welcome, Karen, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lizzie. It's lovely to be here, and thank you very much for hosting today. Fantastic to be part of this.
Today, you know that our focus will be on topics that's very close to your heart: mindfulness, emotional well-being, happiness. And maybe, Karen, you can start us off by elaborating on why you think these three topics are linked.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lizzie. So I think if we think about the link between resilience, between mental well-being, between happiness and mindfulness, I think if we almost start at a definition of what resilience is to begin with, and the one that I like to use is by the UK charity Mind, which is a mental health charity, and they talk about resilience as being not just your ability to bounce back, but also your capacity to adapt in the face of challenging circumstances while maintaining a stable mental well-being. And I think there's a couple of things to sort of unpack there from that definition. So there's obviously a link with stable mental well-being, but there's also this idea of the ability to bounce back, which implies kind of recovery, this ability to stretch, elasticity of the brain and of your thinking. But it also talks about adapt as well, this idea of kind of adapting in the face of challenging circumstances. And I think that's about us recognizing that we need to be able to to adapt, to proactively think differently, and to make some conscious changes in our lives. And the way that I like to think about resilience overall is almost to think about it as being like an umbrella. It's something that's there to shield you in a storm, if you like. It's not perfect. The umbrella may get battered and pulled about all over the place in that storm, but it's there to help you to kind of maintain that protection as much as possible. And I think some people naturally are more resilient than others. That doesn't mean that we can't all be more resilient in our day-to-day lives. It is like a muscle. It's something that we can kind of train and develop and improve. And I think the principles of mindfulness are actually very similar when you think about it. So it's very much about focusing on those things that we can control. And I think a lot of people, when we think about what stresses us and what makes us, unresilient, it's about worrying sometimes about those things that are out of our control, whether it's things that have happened in the past or maybe things that are going to happen in the future. And with both mindfulness and resilience, and I think overall mental well-being and happiness, it's really about understanding what is within our control now and focusing on the present and what we can influence. And as I say, therefore, I think the principles are actually very similar. It's about rooting yourself in the here and now. What can I influence? What can I control? What can I do right now? And a lot of that ultimately comes down to kind of how we're spending our time, I think, and what we're focusing on.
Right. Well, I really like that image of an umbrella. Now that it is quite rainy in our side of the world, but the image of the umbrella to think about resilience, right? And how it can really shield us from whatever might come our way. And in the past year, there were so many circumstances around the pandemic that actually made people feel that things were out of their control. And I'm curious to know, what was your message to maybe people out there experiencing that on how they can improve their resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the last couple of years with the pandemic, everybody's had, a very different experience and different challenges to get through. For some people, it's been about being very isolated on their own, not being able to see family and friends. For other people, it might be that they've been forced into a situation with family or friends that they've not been able to leave. Some people have had to be working from home in less optimal circumstances. Maybe they don't have a home office space. They're working in kitchens or in spare rooms. They've had children, homeschooling, etc. So I think it's really important to recognize that while everybody's gone through this pandemic, everybody's had a very different experience of exactly what that's meant for them and their own individual circumstances. One of the delegates on a course that I ran recently on resilience talked about the fact that we're all in the same storm, but just in different boats. So, some people have got a bigger boat than others, and some people have got, a smaller boat, but ultimately we've all been kind of trying to ride this storm out together. And I think my advice generally, one of the frameworks that I like to use when it comes to thinking about resilience is from positive psychology, and it's the Perma framework. And the acronym Perma ultimately stands for positive emotions is the P, then engagement, relationship, meaning, and achievements. And I advise people to focus on these different 5 areas, not necessarily all of them at once. We don't want anything to become overwhelming. Maybe pick a couple of those that are really going to drive some change in your life, in how you spend your time. And I think a couple of the really important ones here, firstly, is around experiencing positive emotions. And that can be really hard in the midst of a pandemic, when you are feeling isolated, when you are being cut off from other people or from the activities that maybe you would normally try and spend your time doing. But I think it's really important that you experience as many pleasurable things as possible, just to kind of keep yourself going, to experience those positive emotions. But while you're doing that as well, actually to try and link that with one of the other areas of the Perma framework. So if you think about meaning, for example, and where you derive meaning from, can you experience positive emotions while you're doing something meaningful? And what meaning is, varies hugely from individual to individual. So it might be about engaging in a favorite pastime, It might be about reading a book, for instance. It might be learning a new skill. It might be about meditating. It might be about religion. It might be something charitable that you can do. But do something that makes you feel positive and gives you some sense of meaning in your life as well. And maybe it's also an activity that drives this idea of engagement. So something that you can get into a state of what psychologists call flow, where you kind of, you really get absorbed in an activity. You lose all track of time because you're so engaged in it. And again, whether that's something like reading a book, it might be watching a film, it might be learning a new skill or a hobby. Again, it might be about doing something charitable. There are lots of things that actually have many links with the different aspects of the framework. So ultimately, it's about where do we spend our time and our focus, and not just doing things that are pleasurable for pleasure's sake, but something that ultimately gives us something, more meaningful, something that we can engage with. And that will help us in terms of our overall mental well-being, our day-to-day kind of happiness. And I think when I talk about happiness in that sense, it's not just about being smiley and happy all the time. It's about this idea of overall mental well-being and increasing your overall mental well-being. So you're not just constantly happy. Nobody's constantly happy, regardless of how much we'd like to be. We all have, better days than others. We all have days where we get up and, our resilience is a bit frayed and we need to do something to boost that. So think about how you're spending your time, and, whether you've got these activities that can help you with positivity, with meaning or engagement. And the final one I would say, actually, Lissy, on this is a really key thing is about meaningful social relationships as well. And this is so important in the midst of a pandemic and during lockdowns. Think about the relationships that you have with other people, whether those are personal relationships, professional relationships. Are you in contact with people as much as you could be? Are you checking in with people, as much as you could be? It's really easy to just focus on yourself, I think, in these difficult times, and to focus on maybe the people that are, very close to you, or the people that you're living with. Think about those other relationships that you have. As humans, we're hardwired to be a social species, and that's one of the reasons that this whole pandemic has been so challenging for people across the globe, because it has really cut us off from the people that we like to spend time with, that we love. And actually, getting back to a point where we're checking in with people, whether it's on video calls like this, whether it's a phone call, whether it's a text, whether it's writing a card, or, going old school and putting pen back to paper to kind of check in with people. But thinking about those social relationships that we have is incredibly important at a time like this.
Wow, Karen, I am so excited to take on all of those ideas that you've just given us. I've actually taken down some notes that I'm sure would be very helpful. But so remind us again, the Perma framework, right?
The P of Perma is positive emotions. So this is all about experiencing things that make you feel happy. So, you could look at this as about being purely hedonic and things that you enjoy doing. But actually, if you also link that with one of the other aspects, so for example, the E of Perma being engagement, experiencing positive emotions while you're engaged in an activity that you can lose all track of time in, for instance, is something that will really help you to drive mental well-being and overall life satisfaction. So that's the P and the E. The R is about relationships. So as I say, about these kind of social connections that we have with the people around us. The M is for meaning. So engaging in activities that give you meaning, whether those are, religious, spiritual, charitable, finding meaning in terms of your work, or in terms of your personal life. There's meaning all around us. Where do you get that meaning from? And then the final letter, the A, is about accomplishment. So this is about, I guess, setting yourself goals, things that you can achieve, and they might be big things, they might be small things, but that's kind of sense of achievement when you've completed something. You've set yourself some goals, be they big or small. That sense of accomplishment actually drives things like meaning, it drives that level of engagement, it makes you feel positive. So these things are all they're all separate, but they're all very much linked together. And I think, if you work through those different aspects of the framework to understand actually which of these can I influence myself, which of these can I do some small things that make me feel good or that I can achieve, versus some of those maybe bigger, medium, longer term things that you can achieve or be involved in. Actually, that's about, where you can find that balance to really drive your overall mental well-being.
I like that through this framework, we can actually create that balance, right? For our lives, for ourselves at this time when we might feel that, things are out of control. And the image of the boat, right? We are all in different boats, sort of like helps us focus on respecting and offering compassion to each other, especially at this time wherein, as you said, we are experiencing the same storm, but in different ways. And it is really important to maybe understand what the other person is experiencing while understanding your own experience, checking out which area do I need to spend more time with, understanding my positive emotions, maybe engaging more, even if it's virtually because of social distancing, relating to people if, the country where we're at allows that, and again, maybe finding new meaning, whether big or small, so that we can have that sense of achievement in spite of all that's going around us. So, Karen, would you say that with a framework like this, we can consciously choose the path of happiness? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think a lot of this is about making conscious decisions in our lives to move us into a place that helps us to be happier. So, we can't always choose the circumstances that we find ourselves in, but we always have a choice about how to respond to them. So, there will be difficult times, whether you have great resilience, you're naturally a very positive person, there will, or you have less resilience and it's an area that you really need to work on, or maybe you're a pessimist naturally, lots of people are. There are still always things that we can do, and we find ourselves in these situations like in the midst of a global pandemic where everyone's being affected. So it's then about actually, how do I move forward? What do I do proactively to make some conscious changes in my life to help me navigate through this difficult time? So as I say, it might be about proactively, reforming some of those relationships that you have with people, or, reaching out to people again in maybe a different way than you previously did, but trying not to be completely wrapped up in your own bubble, and to think about those relationships and the importance of what it is that you're actually missing now. We are missing that face-to-face contact with other people. Yes, we can't maybe necessarily replicate that in person in the way that perhaps we used to if we're still experiencing lockdowns, but we can still be reaching out to those people and having regular conversations. And I think to your point about us all being in the same storm but in different boats, I think a lot of people at this point are just trying to muddle through. They're pretending that everything's okay. When you speak to them, yes, I'm fine. And particularly I found this from a work perspective as well. We're all working remotely at the moment. We're using Teams or Zoom or whichever kind of video channels, and I think we're all conscious of trying to check in more with each other and have some of those conversations that you might have had just over a desk, for instance, just sitting next to each other in the office. And I think we're all very conscious of that. But how often do we have really open conversations about the fact that, I've had a really bad time this weekend, something's happened, or actually I'm having a bad day today and I don't want to have my video camera on for all of these meetings, or I just need to take a little bit of time out. And certainly something that we've been doing where I'm working at the moment is just trying to have more of those open and honest conversations and say, what, it's okay not to be okay all of the time. It's all right to say that you're having a bad time and that you're struggling. Let us help you with that. We can have those open conversations. We can try and support each other better. We don't need to put this brave face on. We're all human. And I think it's especially important at the moment because the boundaries between work and home have become completely blurred. we're spending much more of our times at home at the moment. It's not easy then to kind of cut off where work starts and where home life ends, because often we'll be in exactly the same physical space. So there's no kind of routine of going into the office and then, leaving the office at the end of the day for a lot of people. So we need those social connections that we have at work, and those relationships at work almost become more important to us, because there is this blurring and there is, this kind of lack of physical support. So being more open, I think, is certainly something that I would encourage. It's not necessarily easy to do that. We don't necessarily want to admit that we're struggling, but actually what we've found, certainly when I've been running courses on resilience and when we've tried to implement this with my work colleagues, is that as soon as somebody says, I'm having a really bad day, other people they'll start nodding and they'll say, you know what, actually, I'm having a bit of a bad time at the moment. And they'll start to share their stories. And someone just has to be brave enough to go first, often, to kind of take that first step and admit that they're having a problem or they're finding it tough. And you'll find that probably everybody is also finding it tough to one extent or another. And then we can start to support each other better. But if we don't have that initial conversation, how can we better support each other if we all think that everything's absolutely fine? We just, we're not able to do that. So I think having those open conversations is so important at the moment.
Exactly. And what you said, the courage to take that first step, to either open up the conversation, just be authentic about what you're experiencing, and just really taking that step to be vulnerable into admitting how things are going for you. And, I'm imagining, Karen, how we can all support many people out there to find their way back to happiness. And I know that you have your own personal experience, and I'm really curious about your thoughts on this statement. We always have a choice how to respond to the circumstances we find ourselves in. So, what are your thoughts about making that choice, Karen, on how to respond to the circumstances in our lives?
I think there are a few things here, Lissy. I think, as you said, we don't always have this choice about the circumstances that we find ourselves in, whether it's the midst of a global pandemic, whether, my own personal situation. As you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I was suddenly widowed in my early 30s. That was obviously not a choice that I made. It was a situation that I found myself in. And it was an incredibly difficult situation to go through, as has been, the pandemic, personally and for lots of people out there. So some of this actually is about the internal narrative and the self-talk almost that we have, and the way that we think about that situation. So the glass is always either half empty or half full. Which way do you look at it? And what do you tell yourself about that? And I think part of it is it's about trying to gain some perspective on a situation and to think about, actually, how can I move forward from this situation? So, you have to deal with what's happened. And sometimes that will be an initial, very emotional, very kind of intuitive reaction. Once you've kind of been through that initial kind of series of emotions, maybe you've cried about the situation, you've been upset, you've been angry, etc. We can't help those emotions. Those are absolutely completely natural. But it's then about trying to gain some perspective and trying to take a step back and be a little bit more objective about that situation. And that's where I think mindfulness can really have a part to play. That, if we are more mindful of what's happening to us in the present, we're more mindful of our feelings and our emotions and the thoughts that we're having, actually we can start to influence those thought patterns. We can start to take a step back from those thoughts and not necessarily engage with them constantly. So I think it's almost like, if you think about your thoughts as being buses, coming through your mind, you don't have to get on the bus with each of those thoughts. You can just be at the bus stop and watch the buses going past and not necessarily directly engage with them. I think that's one of the great things about mindfulness. And, mindfulness really is a practice. Call it a practice, because it is something we have to keep working at. And some days we'll try and do mindfulness or meditation and it will go really well. And then some days you'll try and do mindfulness mindfulness and meditation, your mind is just all over the place, and you could sit there for 10 minutes or an hour and feel, I've not really achieved anything. I've just kept thinking about, something else that's happening in the future or in the past. And it really is about that kind of idea of practicing to bring yourself back to the present, to try and be a little bit more objective about those thoughts that maybe you're having, and to try and gain that perspective.
Yeah, what I like about mindfulness actually is the concept of intentionality, right? I think mindfulness actually sets the stage to be more planful and responsive instead of sometimes feeling reactive, which then takes you to that sense of feeling out of control. Right? And so mindfulness sort of like helps you with that focus. I guess it also can maybe allow you some moments to see the bigger picture rather than maybe some areas that you're focusing on that's not been helpful. And as you mentioned earlier about how to find our way back to that sense of happiness after a setback, I think about, as you mentioned, the narrative, right? Or internal mindset. Like I think about sort of like how you can have either a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, wherein a growth mindset allows you to see that change can happen. You can direct and manage the change that you'd like to see, rather than a fixed mindset where you're in a state of despair or distress, feeling that there's nothing else that you can do about maybe the situation or the circumstance that we are in. So, one of the statements that, is maybe important to emphasize is happiness is about an internal mind state, not about the external circumstances, as you mentioned earlier. Karen, do you ever have a developmental approach to sort of like understanding these life situations?
Well, could you elaborate a little bit, Lissy?
Yeah, no, so I was just thinking, right, that every life stage that we're in or every life experience that we have hopefully will move us or create a momentum to go to the next step of life or a situation that is much better for us. So right now we're all experiencing the pandemic, and hopefully, as you said, we would find that opportunity to flow or to flourish into something better. What are your thoughts about that? That we could have a developmental approach to understanding life situations, right? And how this could create movement towards happiness, towards a different mindset, and so on.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. It comes back to this idea of having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and saying, what can I take from this situation? How do I use what's happened in this situation to learn something or to change something in my life? So, it comes back to that idea of self-talk as well. So how do you interpret a situation? How do you kind of internalize that, if you like, and how do you think about it? And therefore, how do you move forward? So if I look at my own situation a couple of years ago, after I'd left Singapore and I went traveling, there were a couple of different internal narratives that I could have used at that point. I could have said to myself, I'm approaching middle age. I have no home. I have no job. I have no children, no significant other. Where is my life going right now? That is one way that I could have looked at that situation. Or I could have looked at the situation in the way that I did, which was I was youngish, still approaching middle age, but youngish. I had no ties. I was single. I had this ability to go traveling, which I was very privileged to do. And I had no responsibilities. And, the world was my oyster. Now, both of those narratives had some truth in them. Which of those was I going to run with? Which of those was I going to tell myself in order to be able to move forward? And I opted for the more positive one. I opted to look at my life as, I have this opportunity to have fewer responsibilities at the moment and to do things that interest me or that I want to explore, have this opportunity to build some new relationships, etc. And I really took that as an opportunity to grow and learn about myself, and then relocated back to the UK as a result of that, and set up and went freelance and started my own business and got more into the training and etc. But there are very different ways of always looking at a situation, and I think it's about, how do you look at situations? Do you tell yourself that I can gain something from this, or do you tell yourself that this is just, it's terrible and it's never going to end? And I think as well, it comes back to this idea of control. And you mentioned that again, a couple of minutes ago. It comes back to, what can we control? We can control the narratives and the self-talk. It's difficult and it takes practice, but we're able to control that. And we're also able to control what happens right now in the present, through things like mindfulness, through taking that step back, trying to be a little bit more objective. We can control the way that we spend our time as well. So we can think about the activities that we engage in to try and help us with our overall mental well-being. So I think, ultimately we have to see all of these different kind of challenges or experiences that we have as things that we can learn from and things that can help us to grow or to drive change in our lives. Otherwise, we stay static, we stay emotional, potentially in a negative way, because we're only kind of, I guess, clinging on to that initial experience, that initial emotion that may have been upsetting, or it may have been anger, for instance. And it's about us trying to let go of that and say, okay, I've been angry, I've been upset, I've been hurt, whatever that experience has given to us. How can I use that to help me grow and to help me develop in the future? How can I use that to be more resilient next time in, different situations? How can I use that to talk to myself a little bit differently? And what does that mean for my kind of future mental well-being and future development?
And as I was listening to you, Karen, I mean, I'm sure the listeners out there can see how you really manage that transition in your life so well, and how at the point of distress, you were able to actually transform that as a growth opportunity. And I'm curious if at any point was there any experience of fear, when you experience that in your life situation, and how did you overcome it?
Absolutely, there was constant fear, Lissy, honestly. So after my partner died, I honestly, my mind was not as it was, and actually for a long time afterwards. I'd say particularly the first 6 months was incredibly difficult. Actually, it was several years before I really felt like I was kind of back to normal, if you like, and I'm still not sure my memory is exactly what it used to be, but there was constant fear because there was an initial really emotional reaction to that situation, and I took some time out of work. I couldn't function properly, so there was an initial fear of even going back to work in the first place. Was my mind up to it? Was my memory up to it? What was it going to be like interacting with people again when I'd taken myself away from that situation? I knew everyone was going to be nice and supportive, but there was a fear of actually putting myself back into that situation and dealing with it and talking to people about it. Then there was kind of another level of fear because I was then offered a job, an opportunity to move out to Singapore and set up a new business. And at that point, it was either the best possible time to go and do something like that, a fantastic opportunity to completely change my situation, to completely, re-engage and find meaning somewhere else, and hopefully to have some positive experiences. But it was incredibly scary as well. Like, this could have been the worst possible time to do it as well. So there was a huge fear at that point of the unknown. And I think, we're all scared of the unknown. And I guess to describe how I managed that, I almost had to kind of be a little bit more objective again and kind of take that step back and think, what, this is a fantastic opportunity. What would be worse further down the line? Would it be regretting not having tried it, or would it be regretting doing it and it not working out? And it was incredibly scary moving out there on my own. I didn't know anyone. I'd never run a business before. I'd had very limited experience in Asia. And I just thought, what? I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work out, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is I move back to the UK and I don't go back to Asia again. But actually, the best thing that could happen is it's an incredible experience and it works out and I have an amazing life opportunity. So it was hard, don't get me wrong, and I realized that's also a very extreme example of sort of putting yourself out there, but actually with hindsight it was one of the most fantastic experiences I've ever had. It really helped me to put myself in a completely different situation, to establish new relationships, new meaning, new ways of engaging with things in my life. So I think actually sometimes it might not be that extreme for everyone. It might be about taking a smaller step to doing something that you've never tried before, to maybe try a new hobby, or think about your relationships a little bit differently. Even sometimes to review some of those relationships. Certainly one of the things that I did at that time was I reviewed Facebook friends, for instance. Which of these social relationships am I having with people, whether virtually or in person, that are helpful to me at this point, and which of those are not helpful to me? And let's just cut out those people who are being negative in my life, or who are not supporting me, or we're not kind of feeling like we're a team. So sometimes it's about those positive steps, but sometimes it's also about reviewing things that may be holding you back, that are maybe stopping you from changing, or stopping you from making that next step to move forward.
Thank you so much for sharing that personal experience with us, Karen. I really just want to say that listening to all of that, your determination, your motivation was truly very inspiring, and just really giving us an idea of how it might look like to use a circumstance in life and change it to a growth opportunity. Now we know that one of the ingredients of resilience is having a good support system. And how can people sort of like leverage relationships for their happiness and mental well-being?
Yeah, because it's so important, as we said earlier, Lizzie. As humans, we are hardwired to be social creatures. It is so important that we're not operating in a vacuum on our own. And I think that's one of the things that's been so difficult as part of this pandemic, is that a lot of us feel that we are on our own. We're not able to see the people, see friends or family in the same way that we used to. So I think sometimes it's about just really making time for those people that make a difference in our lives. Those people where you can get positive emotions, who are supportive for you. And sometimes it might be as simple as just a quick text message or WhatsApp message, just to kind of check in with people. Sometimes it's about scheduling that time in and having those regular conversations. And don't be afraid to say, like, let's just chat every Saturday, or let me check in with you at certain periods of time, just so that you've got those kind of markers almost in the diary, because sometimes the weeks and the months can very quickly get away from us. But having that real quality time with people, even if it is virtually and it's not quite in the same way that it maybe used to be. And I think as well, thinking about that from a personal and a work life perspective as well. So, those social connections and those relationships that we have outside work, incredibly important. But think about, how do you engender those relationships that you have in a work context as well? And how do you build those social connections, from a work perspective, and, building those kind of ad hoc, informal conversations that maybe you're not having at the moment. So certainly with what I do with my team at the minute, we have our work catch-ups. We're talking regularly, on calls during the day. We have resource check-ins on a Monday morning, but every Friday we all get together and we don't talk about work on a Friday afternoon, and we just have a conversation about what's everybody doing this weekend, how's this week gone, what are you looking forward to? And it's really just about just having those normal kind of conversations and building those strength of personal relationships that are not just transactional. It's not just about work then. It really is about, who are you as a person? Who am I as a person? And let's connect on that deeper level, rather than just on a kind of, working kind of transactional relationship basis.
I like that. And I think a lot of the people out there will truly benefit from a few of those things that you mentioned earlier, right? That first of all, take stock of the people in your life. Make sure that they can offer joyful moments. healthy relationships and friendships. And I heard you also say that make time for really meaningful relationships. Who are you spending time with? And when you're spending your time with them virtually or face to face, hopefully it could really give meaning to the point that you feel safe to really introduce or talk about that most authentic person that you are. And through these moments shared with people, we hope that it will, bring happiness, bring well-being, bring wellness overall, whether you're in the workplace or in your personal home environment, that all of these people will come together as an effective support system for everyone. So Karen, as we approach the end of our podcast, so much information that would be valuable to all our listeners. Do you have your final words of recommendation to everyone out there on how to improve their happiness, especially during these challenging times as we are not really sure where the finish line of this pandemic is, and we are languishing in this state of maybe monotony and so on. Your final words of recommendation, Karen?
I think the key thing really is think about where you're focusing your time. So where are you spending your time? Are you spending your time in the right way? Because ultimately it's an investment, and it's an investment in your mental well-being and therefore in your future happiness as well. So I would advise people to really focus on the relationships that they have with other people, finding those meaningful social connections. I would spend as much time as possible on doing those things which are both fun and which give you positive emotions, but are also meaningful as well. So making sure that you've got that balance of both. It might be fun to watch Netflix and binge watch your favorite series. It's not necessarily meaningful to do that. So making sure that you've got a balance of things that just are positive, but not necessarily meaningful, and those activities which make you feel good, but also drive some sort of meaning in your life. And I think, there's lots of ways to try and do this. It might be about taking up a new activity, or re-engaging in an activity you've tried in the past. It might be about learning a new skill. It might be about just reconnecting with some of your social connections and kind of making a little bit more of an effort there. It might be, as you say, about looking at those relationships that you have and which ones are supportive and positive and which ones aren't, and culling them. And also, to some extent, actually just reviewing things like the alerts that you have on your phone. They can be absolutely overwhelming sometimes. So, have a digital detox or review the notifications. Are they all necessary? Can you mute them for a bit? Is it really helping your overall mental well-being? So think about, the demands that you have on your time and the ways that you spend your time. Are they helping you to drive meaningful social connections? Are they helping you to feel positive? And are they activities, the things that you're engaging in, are they activities that driving meaning for you? And if they're not, where can you spend your time a little bit differently to give yourself that overall mental well-being, to increase your overall levels of day-to-day satisfaction and ultimately your life satisfaction?
Wow, thank you so much, Karen, for all of that. Thank you so much for being with us in this podcast. I think it is important that, people know themselves, know what they need, know what will help them stay happy, stay healthy, and just really being mindful of their emotional well-being. As we continue to battle the pandemic, I think we want to make sure that we stay mentally healthy post-pandemic. And so would really like to appreciate all of you, all our listeners who have joined us in this podcast. And Karen, please stay well and healthy back home in Manchester. And hopefully we can see you in this side of the world sometime soon. While in the meantime, practicing all that we've talked about today. Mindfulness, staying emotionally healthy as we pursue the path of happiness post-pandemic. So thank you, Karen. Thank you to the listeners of this podcast, and thank you, KeyNote, for making this possible.
Thank you, Lizzie. It's been great to be a guest. Thank you so much, and thanks to KeyNote as well.
Take care, Karen. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.